Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Demai, Chapter 7, Halacha 4 in the Art Scroll 68a1. This is going to be a two-part shiur. This is part one of the shiur. And this is really a very interesting Mishnah and a very interesting set of sugyas if you want to understand fundamental concepts in Judaism and Jewish theology and Jewish law and Jewish thinking. This is really the one to look at. And really, we're covering concepts of Breira. This is going to be with the perspective that there is Breira in here. And this is going to be a three-part conversation between Rabbi Meir, who is going to be the anonymous Mishnah here. Rabbi Meir holds that there is Breira. Then you have Rabbi Yose, who also holds that there is Breira, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who also says that there's Breira. But the nature of how this is actually going to fit together, that's going to be a three-way maloket between these three Tannaim, who all agree that there is Breira. So that's something to keep in mind here. Now, Halacha 1 and Halacha 2, we're talking about tithing Demai. And that's going to be over there where you have Demai, and also we saw this in Halacha 3, that there's Demai and you want to eat on Shabbat. And you have a case where you have possession of this product beforehand and you've started the tithing process. And those cases are going to be where basically they're going to be saying it's okay if you don't believe in Breira, then these formulations are going to work. This is a different case. This is going to be talking about where you're buying definite tevel. So the Mishnah is going to be talking about buying from a Kuthian, and we know that the Kuthians at one point were considered to be Jews, and then they were declared after finding idols that they were in fact non-Jews, and that the conversion never actually took effect because most of them still believed in idols. And then you have a case where they themselves still viewed themselves as Jews, and even when they were disqualified. So you have some funny halachic implications on that. Over here, it's going to be talking about an aspect of Kuthian behavior where they would tithe for themselves, even when they were considered to be Jews, because the way they read the Torah law about the stumbling block, they read that literally. And over on selling produce to someone else, they wouldn't tithe that produce that they sold to someone else. So you were basically getting definite tevel. Now, this is talking about a case where you're getting definite tevel, and this is also talking about a case where you're getting a large volume of what's going to be, in this case, wine, and you're going to be separating out tithes from definite tevel, and Shabbat comes along. And now, perhaps, it's, a few minutes before Shabbat, and, you have issues because you can't take out, all of the tithes from this large barrel. Let's say it's a barrel of wine. In the case of the Mishnah, it's going to be talking about 100 lugan, which is a very large quantity. And in the other cases in chapter 7, the earlier cases, we were talking about small quantities of food. And in small quantities of food, it's going to be somewhat easier to handle. Over here, the difference is going to be that because this is a large quantity and you can't do all of this on these large barrels of wine, that you have to actually finish the process not on Shabbat, but after Shabbat. And that's what's going to be the trigger for this, is that you're going to be starting this literally moments before Shabbat, maybe even when, before the 2 stars come out. And then what's going to happen is, so perhaps even just 1 star comes out. It's literally a few minutes before Shabbat, and you have a case where you can't physically take out all of this wine. And now you have a case where you want to use the wine on Shabbat, but you can't finish the process of tithing until after Shabbat. They're all going to agree, these three Tannaim are all going to agree that there is Breira, and that a retroactive declaration is going to work, but there's going to be problems with it. And that's what we're going to be getting into. So over here, we were talking about, we're going to be talking about a stipulation for tithing wine, which is going to be definite tevel. And the Mishnah says, one who purchases 100 lugin of wine from among the Kuthians while it is yet day on the eve of Shabbat, but forgets to separate the tithes before twilight. Now, we know that Ben HaShemashos, this is going to be when there's 2 stars. And you can see this in chapter 1, Halacha 1 of Berachot, that the conversation over there is that it's this in-between time. You're not really sure what the halachic status is. And we're not going to know this halachic status until Eliyahu Navi comes and clarifies it. So in this period of time, you are allowed to tithe Demai, but you are not, I repeat, you are not allowed to tithe tevel during then. So we could be talking about wine that could be where you've obtained this literally where there's 1 star, and it's going to be where it's going to still be early enough to separate tithes out. But again, what this is trying to point by bringing up this Ben HaShemashos idea is that you're really pressed for time. And we know that, okay, you can't separate out the tithes when the 2 stars are out. That's going to be a Doraita issue because of a suffix, and if you're breaking Shabbat, that's going to be a Doraita problem. And we know that if there's a suffix on something that's going to be a Doraita thing, we're going to rule stringently on that, and that's why it's going to be forbidden. Now, in the case of separating out Demai during the 2 stars, that's going to be a suffix on a suffix, and that's going to be lenient. But over here, we have a suffix on something Doraita, so it's going to be stringent. So again, we're talking about this time that's literally perhaps when only 1 star is out, just pressed up where you can only get this designation and you can't actually physically separate it out. Also, perhaps you're going to be too busy, or perhaps you might not have the vessels. That's going to be the insight by the Rashi, that you might not actually have the vessels in order to place the tithes once you remove them. So that's really going to be the idea. Now, the only way to allow the consumption of wine on Shabbat, because that's what we're really trying to get at. How do you do it where you're going to drink this wine on Shabbat? Because that's also something, right? Oneg Shabbat. And the only way to do that is to make a stipulation that's going to be formulated in this Mishnah, and that's going to remove the tevel prohibition. But with this idea of Breira, it's going to postpone the separation, and it's also going to postpone the identification of which specific tithe it is until after Shabbat. And that is going to be the key idea. You want to drink this wine. How do you do this? It's going to be a 3-way maloket among 3 Tannaim who agree there's Breira. So the formulation with Rabbi Meir is going to be like this. One who purchases 100 lugin of wine from among the Kuthians. And by the way, when it's pointing out 100 lugins of wine, this is really pointing out that, we're dealing with something that's tevel. And in the earlier cases, we were just talking about separating out the Trumas Meiser. And over here, you can see they're talking about the Truma Gedola. So it says that they should say the following declaration before dark. It says, the 2 lugin of wine that I will eventually separate after the Shabbat, so that 2 lugin, that's going to be your Truma Gedola, are hereby designated as Truma Gedola, says the Mishnah, and 10 additional lugin that I will separate after the Shabbat are designated as Meiser Rishon, and 9 additional lugin that I will separate after the Shabbat are designated as Meiser Sheni. Now, one of the ideas over here is that after the 9.8 lugin are going to be separated from the remaining 98 lugin as Meiser Rishon, you have 88.2 lugin left. And the 10% that must be designated as Meiser Sheni is going to comprise 8.82 lugin. And the Mishnah is going to be rounding this off to 9. Now, The Mishnah mentions Meiser Sheni because it refers to the majority of years in which the second tithe is in fact Meiser Sheni, and we know that the third and the sixth year can be also Meiser Ani, not Meiser Sheni, but Meiser Ani. The Rosh is pointing out that he stipulates the various tithing portions that he now designates, and it should become identified retroactively after the Shabbat when he's actually going to be separating those portions. So it continues and says, he may then pour himself wine from the barrel and drink it immediately as long as he's careful to leave enough wine in the barrel to be separated later as Truma and Meiser, because otherwise you can have a problem, as we discovered in chapter 7, Halacha 3, that Breira can work the opposite, that if you lose these tithes, that retroactively you drank tevel. Why? Because the tithes don't exist in the world anymore. The tithes that you designated and the tithes that you're supposed to identify, if they left the world, where are they? And what did you do? You ended up drinking tevel. So that's going to be the problem. Tevel we want to protect against because, you have a serious penalty for drinking tevel. Anyway, the Gemara is stating the ruling without dissent, and the Gemara now is going to demonstrate that this is actually going to be a Tannaim dispute, and it was taught in a Breira that the Mishnah's ruling represents the words of Rabbi Meir, and he is the Tana who permits drinking the wine on Shabbat on the basis of the stipulation that relies on future separation of tithes. Now, Rabbi Meir is going to be saying that I'm going to permit you to drink this wine because let's say the barrel gets knocked over or something during Shabbat. Well, that's kind of unlikely, and that's Rabbi Meir's reason for allowing you to drink this wine, even with Breira, because he's saying that, okay, the chances of this all getting spilt out, or the chances of the portion that you designated, or that you've started the declaration on, you're going to identify later, of getting spilt and disappearing, that's pretty remote. And that's not going to be how Rabbi Yose and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai see it. And the Breira continues, it says, but Rabbi Yose and Rabbi Shimon prohibit it. And what do they prohibit? They're worried about you drinking this wine on Shabbat, even though, by the way, they're going to agree that there is Breira. And why is that? Because of the concern that perhaps after someone drinks some of the wine skin will split open. Now, it could also be that the barrel falls over. And basically the idea is that the remaining wine is going to spill out, and the portion that you would have tithed and identified is going to spill out before the tithes are separated. And then you can't separate that tithe after Shabbat because it's gone. And it left the world. And now, the Breira says, and he will be found to have been drinking tevel retroactively. In other words, since the designation of the tithes was made on a separation that never took place, and what they're saying is that, one has to wait until after the Shabbat and physically separate the tithes before drinking any of the wine. So again, the maloket here is going to be, if you're going to be making this designation and you're going to be doing all of this, can you drink the wine during Shabbat or not? Keep in mind, this is 2 Tannaim versus 1, and that is going to be an issue in halacha making. Now, there's a Tosefta that has a slightly different text of this Breira and this give and take between these Tannaim. And over there in the Tosefta's version, Rabbi Yose and Rabbi Shimon are saying to Rabbi Meir, it says, do you not agree that if the wineskin splits open, this person will be found to have drunk tevel retroactively? And Rabbi Meir responds and says, when the wineskin splits open, we'll worry about it then. In other words, we're not going to be worried about this possibility because it's unlikely that the wineskin or the barrel will split open or get turned over on that particular day, Shabbat. In other words, again, we're dealing with this time between the stipulation literally just up until Shabbat and then the separation of tithes, which is going to take place after. Now, in that version of the Tosefta, in all the places of the Bavli where this brisa gets cited, the Tana Rabbi Yudah is also mentioned together with Rabbi Yose and Rabbi Shimon as disputing Rabbi Meir. But here, it's just going to be in the Yerushalmi citation of the brisa, and it could be that the Yerushalmi is going to be holding like Ula in Bavli Erevin 37a, who's holding that Rabbi Yudah should be tallied together with Rabbi Meir as holding that one may rely on that stipulation. So the Bavli is going to be saying that, perhaps Rabbi Yudah is going to be like Rabbi Yose and Rabbi Shimon, and Ula is going to be holding, and perhaps the Yerushalmi is going to be holding, that actually Rabbi Yudah is going to be like Rabbi Meir. And then you have a case where you have 2 versus 2. Gemara is going to continue. It's going to say, this one's true reason for the disagreement with Rabbi Meir is not the same as that one's true reason for the disagreement. In digging down, that's not the true basis of how they're deriving it. And that's really what we want to get at in these sets of sugyas. We want to understand their thinking. Now, yes, fine. Rabbi Yose and Rabbi Shimon are joining forces to argue that Rabbi Meir should at least concede to them that out of this possibility that the wineskin or the barrel is overturned on Shabbat specifically, and they're trying to get him to agree on that. But each of the Tana are going to be coming with their own reason for why they're going to reject Rabbi Meir's view, even though they give the same surface explanation of just saying, well, the wineskin will split open. So the Gemara says Rabbi Yose's true reason is that the stipulation is ineffective because in order for the designation of tithes to take effect, it is required that the tithes be distinctly identified. And this, by the way, is going to be coming up later on in Masechet Sukkah, where you're going to be having in Masechet Sukkah, I believe it's page 13 or 14, a dispute between Rabbi Rav and Shmuel, and it comes up to the same question: is there Breira or is there not Breira? And over there, they're talking about, obviously, making a sukkah, putting the shchach on the sukkah, and also they're trying to look at another parallel case, making tzitzis. And over there, Rav is basically saying, look, if you're tying all the knots and you're doing everything to make the tzitzis, but you leave and you go and you do other things, and you come back at a much later date and you sever the strings, he'll say that constitutes a making of tzitzis, even though it was made later. And Shmuel says, no, it's invalidated forever unless you retie all the strings. In other words, cutting this at a later date is going to be where you did not make tzitzis. It is not valid tzitzis. Why? Because the Torah commands you to make, and it's commanding you to make the tzitzis, meaning that you have to do it all now. It all has to be now in this act. That's a concept that comes up many times in Torah law, and he doesn't allow you to go and do other things and come back at a much later date to sever the tzitzis. The halacha, by the way, is going to go by Shmuel in that case. And over here, Rabbi Yose is the Tana. Rabbi Yose is coming up with a similar idea. He's basically saying, look, the separating of the tithes is going to be a similar thing. That when you're doing it, it's a making. You're making the separation of tithes, and you basically all have to be doing this process at the same time. You can't have a later designation. It's not going to be valid. So the idea is that since this Mishnah's case is talking about where tithes are going to be identified after Shabbat, when they're actually going to be separated physically, that designation cannot take effect at that time, even though you're making the Shabbos Eve stipulation. So Rabbi Yose is generally going to agree with the principle of Breira, but he's going to hold that it can't be relied upon in this case where the tithes are designated before the Shabbat on reliance that they'll be identified after Shabbat. Why? Because he's saying it's like a making. He's saying Trumas and Meiser are subject to this special law that requires them to be identified at the time they take effect. And basically, where the Torah is going to be talking about tithing, he's basically going to be reading that in a way of that it all has to be done basically at the same time. And in the verses that we're talking about, and in the designation that we're talking about now in this Mishnah, it's looking at tithes being designated mentally, and they're not being physically separated. That's really going to be what this issue is about. And the question is going to be, well, are these mental designations of tithes that's going to be done physically after? Rabbi Meir is basically saying that, look, you are that's going to be valid, and Rabbi Meir is basically going to be holding like Rav in that argument about tzitzis, saying that, look, retroactively, if you came and you did it later, it's valid, and so that's really the real Breira opinion. So Rabbi Meir is holding that there's really Breira, that even though there's a chance it could happen, that Breira takes effect and is going to be where you don't need to worry about this making concept, that you can do this later. That's going to be from Masechet Sukkah. That's going to be the minority opinion by Rav. And that's really the position that Rabbi Meir is holding here. Now, Rabbi Yose is going to be holding that there is Breira, but he's going to be holding like the opinion of Shmuel that there are some times when certain things have to be done all at once in a single making. And coming and doing a designation, he would say, I agree with Breira, whereas Shmuel might not agree with Breira at all. But over here, he's saying the problem is that, look, there are some things that require a making, and the physical separation of tithes is part of it. It's not enough just to do a mental designation and then to come back and do it later. Now, Rabbi Shimon's true reason is going to be different, and the Gemara says that perhaps the purchaser will forget to separate the tithes after Shabbat, and he will drink the rest of the wine. Now, the idea is that you have this original designation, and then it becomes a meaningless designation. Why? Because he didn't finish the rest of the mental designation with the physical part. Why? He never physically took out the tithes after. And then since the wine left the world, he forgot to do it. He drank the rest of the barrel of wine over time. Then he was drinking tevel retroactively. And so to preclude this, Rabbi Shimon does not allow on relying on this designation and drinking this. Now, what's interesting here is that Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yose are both saying that if you go ahead and follow Rabbi Meir's point, retroactively, you were found to be drinking tevel. In the case of Rabbi Yose, it would say that, look, this mental designation is a making, and you didn't physically do it, and the separation of Trumas and Meiser all has to be done at the same time. And so when you were drinking this wine, because you didn't do the rest of the physical part at that time, you ended up drinking tevel. Rabbi Shimon is saying we're going to prevent that because, look, maybe you'll forget to separate the tithes out after Shabbat, and then it will come to be that you drank tevel. And again, Rabbi Meir's point is saying, look, it's the making can be done with a mental designation now, a physical separation at the end of Shabbat, and the remote chance that this spills out or that you forgot to separate it out at the end of Shabbat is a remote possibility, and we can worry about that remote possibility if that even actually happens. So that's the three-way dispute. Now, the Gemara is going to talk about a brisa to support that, according to Rabbi Yose, that any maestros designation must be definite, and that there has to be this act that is a continuous act and this idea of a making. So the interpretation of Rabbi Yose's opinion, says this Gemara, is in accordance with that which was taught in the following brisa. This is a Tosefta in Meiser Sheni 4:13. By the way, you can find a parallel for this in the Bavli Erevin 37b. And it's going to say like this. It's going to say, the Meiser Sheni, that the person who says, the Meiser Sheni that is in this barrel is hereby deconsecrated upon the sella of coins that is in this purse. In other words, the one that I will eventually select from this purse has affected deconsecration of the Meiser Sheni. Now, Rabbi Yose says that he has not affected deconsecration. So when you have, so I just want to talk about it real quick with the point of Rabbi Kanievsky. He says at the time of deconsecration, the identity of the sella is undetermined. And okay, he will eventually select the sella from the purse. That's really what we're talking about. And the idea is that according to this Breira, it will be clarified with Breira retroactively that this is the sella that was referred to. Now, Rabbi Yose is not going to agree with that. Now, Rabbi Yose is going to be holding that a Meiser designation cannot take effect unless it is definite at the time it is made. And again, that's going to come up with a way that they're reading the ta'aseh in the Torah, that this is an event that you're doing now. And basically he's saying that in this case, the owner of the Meiser Sheni did not say which of the Selaim it was in the purse. And, which specific coin of this Meiser Sheni was supposed to get the sanctity. And because he did not say which one now, okay, it doesn't get Kedusha. And basically, the deconsecration of the Meiser Sheni, it can't take effect. That's really what he's saying. The Chazan Ish, in his Demai book in chapter 16, Halacha 12, is saying that Rabbi Meir, who holds in this Mishnah that although a Meiser portion must be clearly identified, it's going to be enough for the portion to be identified retroactively through Breira. Now, in this case, says the Chazan Ish, the retroactive identification of the sella coin allows it to become consecrated. And this would end up where you can deconsecrate the produce, and it would work even from the first moment. So this Breira that we're talking about really is, the first part of it really is the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir is saying, look, you don't need to even say which of the coins it would be. And by the way, Rav would also have this same opinion. And if you're going to go look in Masechet Sukkah, and you're going to look at this case about the Shchach, the Sukkah, and the Tzitzis over there on page 13, page 14, Rav would basically be having the same point, that this it doesn't need to be clearly identified, and when you pick it out later, retroactively, it's going to be as if that was the one all along. In other words, from the first moment it was done, that this deconsecration took effect. And the Gemara is going to continue, and it's going to say that if one stated that the Meiser Sheni in this barrel is hereby deconsecrated upon the old sella that is in this purse, or upon the old dinar that is in this purse, and there is only one old sella or dinar in the purse, he has affected deconsecration. Now, again, going back to this Breira, Rabbi Yose agrees with this. Okay, this is Rabbi Yose agreeing with it. Now, what's going on here? Vilna Goan says that since he distinctly identified the coin that is to acquire the Meiser Sheni sanctity, it's designated, and then the deconsecration is going to be valid. Now, the Marafulda is going to be saying that if there are more than one, in other words, there's two old sella or two old dinar in the purse, then this designation becomes ambiguous again, and then it's going to be like the Breira's first case, where it's going to be invalid according to Rabbi Yose, because look, which of these two coins was it? Now, why would Rabbi Yose agree that if there's one old sella that it's going to be that way? Why would anybody say that? So basically, what they're saying is look, there's a bunch of identified coins in here, okay, unidentified coins. This one is different from those other ones. And basically, Rabbi Yose is conceding and saying, look, Normally, I would say you have to hold up and say this specific coin, or you have to point to it. You have to clearly designate it. And Rabbi Yose is basically conceding and saying because there's only one that's different there, and you've identified which is the different one, then that's going to take effect. Now, normally Rabbi Yose would require something a little bit further than that. He would say, look, no, you actually have to have a more physical interaction with this, where you're actually having the coin there and you're actually pointing to it or holding it or something like that. In other words, he's saying that, look, even though that we're not going that far, because there's only one coin in this purse and all the other ones are new and this one is old, that is going to be enough to take effect. Now, the Gemara continues and says, on the other hand, the sages agree with Rabbi Yose that if one stated that the Meiser Sheni in this barrel is hereby deconsecrated upon the sella that I will later take from my son's possession, or upon the dinar that I will later take from my son's possession, or even if he eventually receives a sella or dinar from his son, he has not affected deconsecration. And the Gemara says, since the coins were not in his possession at the time. This is a very deep idea here. And Rabbi Kanievsky is saying about this that, look, if the son had authorized his father to use the coins for deconsecration, then the deconsecration would be effective. And the Breira is referring to a case where the father did not have the permission to use the son's coins. And this unauthorized use of someone else's coins is going to be ineffective for making the deconsecration. And basically it's going to be that, look, you have to be making a deconsecration on something that's your property. It has to be in your possession. So in the case that Rabbi Kanievsky is saying is, look, if the son gave permission, then it's like the father had the use of the coins. It's okay, even if it's in the son's possession, that the father can refer specifically to these coins over here. Going to be like this purse, right? It's going to be saying perhaps the coins are in the drawer and the son has it in his house, and the son is saying you can deconsecrate your produce onto these coins in the drawer. And even though it's not in the father's possession, they can identify which coins it is. It's going to be like the old coin in the cellar. You're saying, okay, physically, maybe I don't have it in front of me. Maybe I'm not holding it up to do this process. Maybe I'm not pointing at it. But I know that these are the only coins in the drawer, and I'm putting it over there, even though it's in the other person's possession. Now, if he didn't give the permission, then it's not in his possession. And if it's not in his possession, basically the rabbis are going to be agreeing with Rabbi Yose that it has to be in the possession, and it's not a valid deconsecration. Now, what would Rabbi Meir be saying? Rabbi Meir would be saying, well, wait a second, there's Breira. So if these coins are later given over to the father, or permissions given over to the father, then retroactively this took effect. Retroactively, the deconsecration took effect. And that's really what this argument's going to be about. I want to point out something that the Rambam is saying. Rambam, you can see this in Hilchos Meiser Sheni 4:16. He's saying when it's talking about it's referring to the son. This is what the Rambam is writing. And he says that we're dealing with a case where the son authorized the father to use the sella coin for deconsecration, but there's a possibility that maybe he spent it before the father actually performed the deconsecration. And because of this uncertainty, the deconsecration cannot be considered valid until the father determines that this sella was still in the son's possession at the time. And should he determine that it was in the son's possession, then the deconsecration is going to be recognized as effective from the first moment. But if it left his possession, then it's not a valid declaration. And that's really the keen insight by the Rambam. I mean, the Rambam's point is saying that, look, what this Gemara is talking about is what happens if it left the possession, and what happens if the son doesn't have it anymore. Then, you've deconsecrated something that doesn't exist. And this is going to be very much like what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is worried about in the case of spilling the barrel of wine. In other words, you went and you made a declaration, and very good, you physically didn't take it out yet, and then, the wine spills, barrel falls over, the wineskin splits open, the designated portion spills out all over the place, and retroactively, you, through Breira, ended up eating tevel. This is going to be the same case where you went ahead, you made a declaration on deconsecrating the coin, but the son already spent the coin. Then you didn't deconsecrate it onto anything. It's not there. It left the world. So the Gemara is going to be talking about this argument of Rabbi Yose and Rabbi Shimon that one may not rely on a maestros stipulation that requires separation of tithes at a later time. And again, their initial quick response is going to be because the wineskin might split open. But again, we know from the last Gemara that there's actually deeper points for why they're forbidding it. And now the Gemara is going to cite a Mishnah that looks like it dismisses this concern, and this is really going to be the defense of Rabbi Meir. And the Gemara says that we learned in the Mishnah over there in Gittin 3.8, and in Bavli it's going to be Gittin 31a. And it's going to say that if one sets aside an amount of fruit in order to separate Truma and Meiser with them from the rest of the tevel produce, or he sets aside coins in order to separate and deconsecrate Meiser Sheni with them, he may continually separate, in other words, redeem them, on the coins on the assumption that they are still in existence. And the Gemara says that now this Mishnah seemingly is not consistent with the opinion of Rabbi Yose and Rabbi Shimon. So the question that's coming up is that, look, the Mishnah is holding that we don't need to worry about the loss of fruit, or in this case, the loss of the coins, because we can assume that they're still in existence. In other words, it has a hazakah that we knew it was in existence, and the odds that during this period of time before the father got either permission to use these coins or got possession of these coins from the son, that they were still in the son's possession. So there's a hazakah, basically, according to Rabbi Meir's position, that it's still in his possession. In other words, there's nothing to disprove that there's a change in circumstance. There's nothing to say that, maybe the son went and spent it. There's no information that shows that it actually happened. So we can assume that these are still in existence, either the coins or the fruit. And it's following in this case that we don't need to worry about this wineskin or wine barrel that, is over this period of time on Shabbat between, just before you made this designation, this mental designation just before Shabbat, and the physical separation that happens just after Shabbat, that it's basically going to be the same thing. Basically, it's going to follow this case that, we can say that, we have a hazakah that it's still in existence. It didn't spill over, and we have a hazakah, it's still there. So really, it's going to be fitting with, this Mishnah that you can drink from it on Shabbat, and you can rely on the tithing later. That's really going to be, Rabbi Meir's position. And Rabbi Zera is going to sum this up, and we're going to finish up, and we're on the next part going to get into an amazing set of sugyas that gets more into Breira, but more with coin purses. We're going to do that tomorrow. And the cases tomorrow are going to be what happens if hekdesh falls into a coin purse, and then you're trying to get out this thing, then can you use Breira to retroactively do it? But in the case over here, to finish up about the wineskin, Rabbi Zera is going to say like this. He's going to say there, in the case that's discussed by Rabbi Yose and Rabbi Shimon, if the wineskin splits open before the tithes are separated, then retroactively, all of the wine is untithed, it's unrectified tevel. And since the designation of the tithes, would be, in that case, it would be nullified. And being that, a future splitting of the wineskin would render the wine unfit retroactively, which is going to be the point of both Rabbi Yose and Rabbi Shimon, in order for the purchaser to drink the wine on Shabbat, he has to rely on this assumption that the wineskin will remain intact in the future. And in other words, it's going to have this hazakah that it's still going to be there over the Shabbat. In other words, until the tithes are going to be separated after Shabbat. And basically, there's no halachic basis for predicting future events. And therefore, the purchaser has to be worried that perhaps the wineskin really will split open or get knocked over before it's separated. And over here, in the case of the coins, it says, but here in the case that's cited in the Mishnah over in Gittin, where one sets aside fruit or coins with which to tithe or redeem, even if the fruit or the coins are lost, it is only from the time of the loss onward that the produce is unrectified. In other words, the difference here is that in this case, any tithing or deconsecration that's done while the fruit or the coins are still in existence, this is going to be effective. This is going to work. And that's going to end up rectifying the produce in question. And only a tithing or deconsecration that's done after they're lost is going to be ineffective. So what this Mishnah over there is saying is that whenever the person wishes to tithe or redeem the produce, he needs only to rely on the assumption that the fruit or the coins are presently in existence. And therefore, it's going to be a valid halachic basis for this assumption. It's going to be a hazakah. And basically, the person can proceed to tithe or redeem the produce without worry that the fruit or the coins were lost. And over here, with respect to the present state of the fruit or coins, we know that there's a hazakah, and we know that the coins are still in existence. And once it's known to be in existence without any new evidence showing otherwise, you're allowed to rely on this assumption of a hazakah to use the fruit or the coins, as long as it's not discovered later that, in fact, it did leave the world, it got lost, or it got spilt, or spent. And in the case where this new information comes out, where it ended up, where whatever was tithed before actually ends up getting lost, whatever is left over is actually going to be unsanctified, because the hazakah is going to be about what we know about right now. And so if you use some of this fruit now and it's later found out that the rest of the fruit got destroyed or part of the fruit got destroyed, then that's new information that comes up, and whatever is left over is now going to be untithed. So it's a little bit different, because in the case of total uncertainty, okay, where we have this barrel of wine, okay, basically what it's trying to say by Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera is trying to point out, look, the two cases are not exactly the same. And basically, the original tithing declaration that Rabbi Yose is trying to contest here, says the Vilna Goan, is that if the remaining wine spills before the Truma and the Meiser are ever separated, it ends up that the original declaration is of no consequence, and that the wine that was consumed on the basis of this declaration is going to be tevel all along. And it's going to be over here a little bit different, because in the case where something is known to exist, there's a hazakah that has at the present, it's assumed that it still exists because no new information came to light that it doesn't exist. And so because there's this no new information that comes about on Shabbat, basically you don't have a legal basis to assume that the wineskin will remain intact until after Shabbat, when the tithes can be separated. And therefore, that's going to be the position according to Rabbi Yose, on why you can't make this assumption, and he doesn't have a permit to drink this wine. Now, Rabbi Meir, who is going to allow the drinking of the wine on Shabbat, is going to agree that a hazakah can't predict future events, but he's holding that the possibility of the wineskin splitting open or the barrel falling over at the end of Shabbat is too remote for us to be worried about that at all. And that's going to be why he's going to be allowed to drink the wine, even without being able to rely on a hazakah. And that's really going to be summing it up. And part of the difference here is going to be that between, the first case about the barrel of wine, the other case about the fruit. Again, the point with the fruit is that you have a hazakah that it still exists, and if it were to be lost, whatever you used, during that time until you found out this new information, it's not retroactively all going to be tevel, only the portion that remains. In the case of the barrel of wine, what they're saying over there is that if part of it's spilt, retroactively, all of it is going to be tevel. So that will sum that up. Have a great day.